Season 2 of The Gilded Age has come to an end, and what an ending it was. I actually think a lot of the predictions that we made actually proved to be correct, which is something that is good. With the results of the Opera War, the winner's cunning plan, the dismantling of the love triangle that Marian was in, and Oscar losing the family fortune all getting a main focus, there's so much to get our teeth into with this episode. So let's not wait any longer. Let's jump into it and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is The Gilded Age Season 2 Episode 8 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The Van Rijn's fortune. This episode opened up with a continuation from the end of last week's episode. We saw that Mr. Harcourt was round the Van Rijn's property and was discussing options with them over what they could do with what little money that they had left. Whilst not all of the money was gone, there was still a small amount that remained, which meant that after Agnes had sold the house along with the small pot that she had, she'd be able to move into somewhere a little less glamorous and more modest. But at least she'd still have some finances available and be able to live a life. This sparked the entire narrative for the Van Rijns in this episode, because it didn't only impact them, but it also impacted their workers, as they had to find somewhere new to work in order to be able to make a living. This brought to light the hostility that was present amongst the family, but more so aimed at Oscar for the fact that he was responsible for losing it all. But the main mood and feeling was a steady panic, a panic that wasn't at the forefront and taking over and apparent for the rest of the public to see. Agnes was aware of the fact that her lifestyle would need to change following her moving, and that whilst being a socialite, her friends would stand by her for a short period of time. But then, in order for them to not tarnish their image, they'd most likely start to steer clear of her. So she was fully aware that it would quite literally impact every corner of her life. The financial side, the personal side, and the social side. During this episode, within the first third, we heard that Ada had lots of paperwork that she had to go through, which was all to do with Reverend Forte's death. And it was within this pile that we saw that the answers to all of their problems would lie. When this was mentioned in the early part of the episode, I had a feeling that it would come back. It felt too deliberately said, which isn't a bad thing. But I thought it would contain some of the answers, and there might have been a glimmer of hope within it. At the end of the episode, we saw that Ada sat down with Agnes and Marian and revealed that Reverend Forte had a company that was in his name that he inherited and kept up and running because people relied on it. However, when he began working for the church, he gave up all ties to the money that he once had. So upon his death, it meant that Ada was set to inherit it all. This resulted in the Van Rijns not needing to sell the house and for their life to not change, because Ada would be able to utilize what she inherited to keep them there. This was something which was met with extreme happiness. And with Agnes telling Bannister to inform everybody downstairs, he went to do that. But then he asked Ada if that was what she wanted. This is because she is the rich person in the family now, and the person that they'll most likely be taking orders from. So the switch in power balance that we predicted is definitely going to be occurring. For the first time in the sisters' lives, the shoe is truly on the other foot, and Ada is the more powerful person because of the money that she now holds. If a Season 3 does get commissioned, it's going to be interesting to see how that power balance switches over, and if Agnes is able to handle it. I imagine she will, because she's got no other option, but it will be interesting to see how the relationship changes. Marian's love triangle. This was something that I actually did a few videos on throughout the season, and I also mentioned it in a few of my previous reviews. But, you know, it actually happened. Larry is now a thing, and everybody who wanted them to be together were finally able to see that kiss happen, and them express their true feelings for one another. During this episode, we saw that Marian was still uncertain about if she wanted to marry Dashiell, and it was almost plaguing her mind. However, the final thing that caused her to want to say something to him was when Dashiell said Harriet's wedding. When he mentioned about offering to pay for their wedding, he misspoke and said his late wife's name instead of Marian's. This was something that was noticed by everybody else other than him, and it made her realize that she was more so filling a void in his life rather than acting on true love. He did care for Marian, but it wasn't in the way that she wanted to be cared for, as the feelings weren't reciprocated. Plus, he wanted her to stay at home and to not work, whereas we know that Marian had ambition and she didn't want that to be the way that she lived. So that was what ultimately made her call the wedding off with Dashiell, and to be fair, he took it better than what I thought he would. Considering the subtleties that the character had throughout this season, I thought he might have been a bit horrible upon hearing it, but he wasn't, which was good. What was nice about this was that Agnes didn't kick up a fuss about her not marrying Dashiell. One of the things that Marian feared, And Ada also recognized that Marian didn't want to be with him, so she was met with only support, which was good. This opened up the possibility for Larry to enter the picture. Throughout the entirety of the show, we've seen them being extremely good friends with one another, and Larry being there for her in her darkest moments, and this was the case here as well. Larry invited Marian to go to the opening night of the Met with him, and to accompany him in the Russell's box, and that is exactly what we saw happen. It was following them leaving the Met that he walked her home, and on the doorstep where we saw most of their encounters in Season 2, that Larry went in and kissed Marian. This was something which Marian wanted, as they both smiled at each other afterwards. An act that we saw Marian never doing with Dashiell, so it's something that definitely opens up the option for their relationship to blossom and develop in the next season of the show. I did always think that Bertha may not be too accepting of Marian, considering how particular she was when getting involved with Larry and Miss Blaine, but in this case she didn't say a word about Marian accompanying Larry to the opera house, so that also shows us that the family's approval could be there. The Battle of the Opera Houses. What I thought this episode showed us was how much people can change based on what's popular. We saw this being exhibited the most when it came to Mrs. Fish, and one can only imagine that that is probably what it was like at the time. The main factor that the result of the opera war was dependent on was which one the Duke was supposed to be attending. Certain papers said that he was going to be attending the Academy, and certain other ones said that he'd be attending the Met. Mrs. Astor offered the Duke a large sum of money in order to attend the Academy, and it was revealed to us that the Duke couldn't turn down the offer because he was in some financial trouble and people relied on him. So he did originally plan on going there. However, Bertha had her eyes set on other ways of trying to secure the Duke's attendance, especially after George said that she couldn't give up more of their money due to already investing a lot in the Met. During the concluding moments, we saw that the Metropolitan was absolutely packed, and the Academy was rather empty, something which was symbolic of the fact that in reality, the Met went on to be a huge success, and the Academy faded away and wasn't the center point of society like it once was. The Duke ended up arriving at the Metropolitan, and we saw that he was sitting down next to Gladys, and little did she know, or anybody else in their family, that Bertha offered up her own daughter in order to secure the Duke's attendance. She may not have offered him money, but she offered him a way into their family, which over time is significantly more money than he would have ever had by taking up Mrs. Astor's offer. With her not revealing the deal to Gladys or even George, I think we're going to see this being a problem for the family in the next season of the show. We know that Gladys was actually more interested in Billy Carlton, as she thought that he was nicer than the Duke, as she even said that to her mother. But still, Bertha showed her true colours and that she'd rather view her daughter as an object to just pawn off for the Duke's attendance in order to improve her own position in society. She may have won the war in terms of the opera houses, but I think she's going to be facing some battles that are a little closer to home in the next season of the show. Peggy and the closing of the schools. My one issue with this story is that it just kind of felt shoehorned in, and like it didn't really get the focus that it deserved if they wanted to develop it properly. We saw that Peggy, her family, and the black community were in uproar about the schools which black students attended being shut down. And we also saw that the education board altered the time of their proposed meeting in order for it to not get addressed. However, upon them finding out the change of plan, we saw that they stormed into the meeting and demanded the change, something which proved to be successful. They managed to get 2 of the schools to stay open and only 1 to close, so it showed that they were able to implement change and that it was a step in the right direction. So I imagine that's something that will be continued in Season 3. One thing about this episode was that we actually got a glimpse of Mrs. Fortune. However, it was a blink and you'll miss it because we only saw her at the entrance of a doorway with her baby. Seeing her was something which made Peggy regret the actions that she took in kissing Mr. Fortune, knowing that there was a family that could get broken up due to her part in what was done. This was what ultimately led her to leave the paper and to leave Mr. Fortune. She knew that they couldn't be together because there were feelings that were present between the both of them. This made me look at Mr. Fortune differently because it felt like he was just open to having an affair despite the fact that he had a wife and a young baby at home. So Peggy is definitely better off leaving the paper and finding happiness somewhere else, and also with somebody else. Other stories that were wrapped up. One story that we saw being addressed and it didn't have a main focus was that Mr. Watson had accepted his daughter's offer and was going to be leaving the Russells. It was mentioned that he wouldn't be returning to see the workers there, so I think that is him being written out of the show. It wouldn't surprise me if we didn't see him again. Jack and his clock was something which was also developed on, and we saw that his patent got approved. This is something which I think will continue to be developed in Season 3. He went to Larry Russell with the intention of him finding out if there was anything that he could do in order to take it a step further, and it was at the end where we saw that Larry wanted to go into business with Jack, so I think that will get more of a focus in Season 3. Overall review. I thought the season finale was really good. I think it had a large payoff for all of us who had waited for certain things to happen, such as Larry and Marian being together, the result of the opera war, Jack getting success, and Forte saving the day from beyond the grave. I did feel that a lot of it was predictable, but it was predictable where it still kept you on your toes, so there were some surprises that were in there. I thought the acting was really good in not only this episode but the entirety of the season. I genuinely felt so connected to many of the characters, which is something that is hard to do. I do hope that this show gets a Season 3, because I'd say that it does deserve it. It's got a good story at its core, great acting, and a way of gripping us in every week. But I guess time will tell with that. Hopefully we won't have to wait that long to find out. So, there you have it. The Gilded Age Season 2 Episode 8 Ending Explained.